We start tonight with President Trump putting his stamp on the federal government with unprecedented speed. And just 6 days in, he's already taking a victory lap with his first post-inauguration rally in Las Vegas.
I declared a national emergency at our southern border. Under our leadership, America is back open for business. I pardoned hundreds of political prisoners who had been viciously persecuted. We are now in a merit-based world.
Trump has 2 more members of his cabinet in place tonight. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, whose nomination once seemed on life support, was sworn in today after a 50-50 Senate vote. Vice President J.D. Vance stepped in to break the tie. And in an overnight move that seems to have caught much of Washington by surprise, the president fired the inspectors general, the title for top in-house watchdogs, from a number of federal agencies. With so much to cover, CBS's Willie James Inman is with the president in Las Vegas. Willie James, good evening.
Good evening to you, Nancy. As members of President Trump's cabinet are confirmed by the U.S. Senate, behind the scenes, the White House is making swift overnight changes to the federal workforce.
In a move that has caused bipartisan backlash, the Trump administration fired government watchdogs from a number of agencies overnight. In a letter obtained by CBS News, the now fired Inspector General of the Small Business Administration said that he believes the actions taken are not legally sufficient.
He seems to be trying to throw a monkey wrench into the kind of any independence left on our governments.
Under law, Congress must be given a 30-day heads up, along with a detailed explanation about the removal of an Inspector General. In a statement, Republican Senator Chuck Grassley said he would like further explanation from President Trump. The drastic shift is part of a flurry of executive action during President Trump's first few days in office, which also include the removal of diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. The White House now says agencies should terminate DEI employees within 60 days.
The yeas are 59, the nays are 34. The nomination is confirmed.
Meanwhile, the president's cabinet is starting to take shape, with former South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem confirmed by the Senate this morning to serve as DHS Secretary. And Pete Hegseth is now the Secretary of Defense after a tie-breaking vote late Friday night.
I want to thank the President of the United States, our Commander-in-Chief, Donald Trump. It is the honor of a lifetime, sir, to serve under you.
And Nancy, CBS News has learned that the Army has told units to prepare for possible deployment in anticipation of numbers at the U.S. southern border ramping up in the next 24 to 48 hours. Nancy?
Willie James Inman, thank you.
This image came to mind today. The White House undergoing a massive renovation in 1948.
Now, with a former real estate developer in the executive mansion, another teardown is underway in Washington and beyond, shaking the government as we've known it to its foundations.
Since the inauguration, President Trump has offered buyouts to 2 million federal workers, fired 16 inspectors general, and got rid of Justice Department officials who investigated him.
And he gave billionaire businessman Elon Musk free rein to weed out what they see as waste and fraud. That included shutting down USAID, the agency that provides humanitarian aid overseas. Critics say what's being lost in this government makeover is oversight and expertise.
Margaret Brennan in Washington now. So, Margaret, where does it seem they're going with all of this?
Well, overnight, nearly all of the 10,000 USAID employees who work to feed the world, combat disease, and respond to disasters, they learned they'll be put on leave as of midnight on Friday. And while the first target is foreign aid, it makes up a very small fraction of the federal budget, less than 1%. But it may be a test case for what is coming to other parts of the federal government.
Let them work!
Let us work, they shouted.
Let us work!
USAID personnel have been locked out of their offices and emails since Monday, leaving many confused as to whether they'll even have health care or paychecks coming. We spoke with one of those individuals who has spent the past decade at USAID.
Why in our conversation do you think you need to remain anonymous?
Everyone is really scared. First, we were scared for our jobs. Then we were scared for the safety of our programs. I have a family, like most Americans, and I want to be brave, and I just don't want to put them at any more risk than I have to.
Elon Musk posted on X, USAID is a criminal organization, time for it to die. What did you think when you heard that?
He said that. He said we were vipers. He said that we were worms and not a bad apple, but just worms. He said that we are evil lunatics.
In recent days, the Trump-appointed chief of staff resigned, and the two heads of security put on leave after they refused to let DOGE-linked staffers access classified information.
Are you still officially employed by the U.S. government?
I do not know what my status is. Part of that is that what's been happening has been moving with incredible speed and also an incredible level of sloppiness.
The Trump administration argues the cuts will increase efficiency.
Not only have we abandoned our colleagues, which is an absolute moral atrocity, but we have abandoned our partners in the world. If you've ever seen those photos of people delivering bags of food or wearing the USAID vests or delivering medicines or the big trucks coming in with aid, it's got big USAID logos on it, right? It's got American for a reason. It's got American flags on it. It shows people this is the U.S. coming to your aid.
Margaret, these cuts across the executive branch, to many people it sounds like what Donald Trump promised, and now he's making good on that promise. But it's not about cuts, right? It's about the kinds of cuts.
Right. It's not what you're doing, it's how you do it. Efficiency, no one's going to argue against. But, John, it's hard to put a price on expertise and experience. And as skilled workers are either fired or take buyouts, that impacts the government's ability to respond to crises. That applies to buyouts over at the CIA, where it takes years to develop analysts and agents before sending them into the field, or when it comes to these development workers who go overseas to stem a TB or Ebola or polio outbreak before it gets to American shores. It impacts America's soft power ability to gain influence, not through force. And it leaves a vacuum for China, which is America's chief adversary, to potentially fill that void.
So, Margaret, when you say this could be a test case for other agencies, other larger agencies, how might that play out?
Well, you know, Maurice, one of the things that stands out here is the ripple effect, not just in terms of recipients of aid abroad who, can't get their antiviral AIDS treatments, but here in the United States, a CEO of one of the aid groups told me that between 10 to 50,000 American jobs are expected to be cut across the U.S. in the coming weeks. Not government jobs, private sector jobs, as organizations go bankrupt. And keep in mind, the humanitarian world is not the only industry that is reliant on U.S. government spending.
Some of the humanitarian aid USAID provided went to the African nation of Sudan. For nearly 2 years now, its people have been caught in the middle of a civil war between two warlords.
Deborah Patta got a rare look inside Sudan, as you're about to see here. What's happening to children there is heartbreaking.
It took us nearly 2 years to get visas to enter Sudan. Once inside, we drove 12 to 14 hours a day to reach areas near the front lines. And what we found was deeply distressing. A country in the grip of the largest humanitarian crisis in the world. In the tented camps where families have fled war, every newly arrived child is critically starving. The worst cases are hospitalized. Tiny bodies wasting away. This little girl was too weak to even cry.
I think we're in dire straits here in Sudan, to be honest.
Dr. Mohammed Fadlala is from Cincinnati. He's a volunteer with Doctors Without Borders at the Al Bullock Children's Hospital near the capital, Khartoum. He had just admitted 13-month-old Ibrahim Jaffer when we got there. Fadlala told us the little boy was close to dying and his eyesight was badly damaged from severe malnutrition. The family had been trapped by fighting for months. There was no food, his grandmother Niamat Abu Bakr told us. At times, nothing at all, not even water. She was worried they were too late. A fear shared by every parent here. Doctors and nutritionists here all told us the same thing. Without humanitarian aid and medical intervention, the children you see in this ward would not be alive. And much of that aid comes from USAID. America is also the World Food Programme's biggest funder. And a lot of the grain you see in this warehouse is paid for by the US. There's an urgent race to get it to famine-stricken areas. It had been gathering dust for more than a month, while the WFP waited for permission to transport it. Food has frequently been weaponized by rival warlords. And if that wasn't hard enough, then came President Trump's announcement of a 90-day suspension of aid. WFP's Lenny Kensley told us that could be catastrophic.
The time to roll back funding is not now. It's the time to step up funding.
You don't have 90 days.
And every single delay means lives are lost. We are extremely worried it's going to be too late. And we're going to be digging up bodies instead of feeding them.
Deborah, I want to ask you about some of the other ramifications of this humanitarian aid from USAID. What happens down the line if it doesn't make it?
Well, John, let me give you a concrete example. In the last few weeks, 2 ships have docked at Port Sudan. American ships carrying food provided by USAID. Now, each of those ships could potentially feed over 1 million people. That food has to be offloaded, stored in a warehouse, then at some point loaded onto a truck and driven to where these starving people are. So when we talk of aid, it's not just food, it's the trucks, the drivers. There's no one to pay the drivers. Staff have been locked out of their computers. They don't have access to their phones, their contacts. We are talking about the unraveling of an entire system, which will be hard to bring back. And as that system collapses, one source told us 8 million Sudanese could starve to death.
And Deborah, that little boy in your piece, Ibrahim is his name. His situation tugs at your heart. Do you know how he's doing tonight?
Oh, thanks for asking that, Maurice. Well, we went back to see baby Ibrahim a day later, and sadly his condition had worsened. Now, this is a very common problem for children suffering from severe malnutrition. If left unchecked, if they do not get help, they usually develop an infection that could kill them. He was on oxygen, an intravenous drip. Doctors were very worried, but I'm happy to report that we checked up on him today, and he's doing a lot better. In fact, he's even gained a little weight.
The president is purging the government of investigators. Some prosecute criminals, others are watchdogs who make sure our food, veterans hospitals, highways, and more are safe.
The Trump administration says they cannot be trusted, but critics of the president say he is gutting the very offices that weed out people who should not be trusted. Here's Justice correspondent Scott McFarlane.
You're not a Democrat. I'm nonpartisan. You're not a Republican. I'm nonpartisan. Why are they trying to take you off the playing field? My only guess could be they're trying to impact the independence that IGs have, because it makes no sense.
Days after he and more than a dozen of his fellow federal watchdogs were fired, Michael Missel, Inspector General of the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs since 2016, and some of the others filed suit today to get their jobs back, arguing they were fired for political reasons. This threatens not only Missel's paycheck, but he argues the safety of veterans in hospitals and clinics nationwide.
Does this put people's lives at danger?
The work that we did protected veterans' lives and made the health care much safer for veterans. Inspectors General root out misconduct and safety failures impacting communities from coast to coast. Missel recently uncovered delays in medical appointments for veterans, including cancer patients in Buffalo. Others flagged meat inspections that bypass safety rules in California, and postal workers stealing credit cards from the mail, including near St. Louis. Republicans defend the purge. California Representative Darrell Issa argued the fired inspectors failed to perform.
Some Americans might think they're pulling a lot of police off the street here, and they take inspectors general all at once and take them off the playing field.
Well, again, a new administration is acting quicker than any other administration in modern history. But no, they need to be judged on who's the acting, who's replacing them, how fast they'll name those names, And will they be naming people who will aggressively look for waste, fraud, and abuse?
But the purge is not just in government.
It's pure retaliation, vindictiveness, retribution.
Private attorney Mark Zaid, who represents whistleblowers, has just been stripped of his security clearance by the Trump administration, making it more difficult for his potential clients inside the CIA or FBI to report misconduct.
They are pulling those away or neutralizing those who could do things against them.
Scott, this question of the inspectors general firing is now in the courts. Where's it likely to go next?
Two real possibilities, John. A judge could order the inspectors reinstated to their jobs and decide that the administration violated the law in the firings. Or the president can eventually handpick his own inspectors to police his administration, which Maurice and John would make an awful lot of frontline investigators awful skittish to take a case that may displease the president.
And if that does happen, if he wins in court or chooses to ignore the court ruling, Scott, then what happens?
Unequivocally a sea change, perhaps a permanent change in American government. If there are political appointees running watchdog offices, maybe they focus on just red states or blue states, red cities or blue cities, or Maurice and John, on topics the president wants them to investigate.
A federal judge in Washington refused today to block Elon Musk and his Department of Government Efficiency from accessing government data. The judge said states suing Musk and DOGE had failed to demonstrate, quote, clear evidence of imminent irreparable harm.
Musk and President Trump say DOGE's mission is to root out fraud, waste, and abuse. And the White House claims DOGE has uncovered fraud, at least as the administration defines it. Here's Weijia Jiang.
This is what White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt pointed to as proof when asked about the fraud that Elon Musk's team claims to have uncovered.
This is a DEI contract, $36,000 for U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. This is a $3.4 million contract, a Council for Inclusive Innovation at the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. Oh, I love this one, $57,000 for climate change in Sri Lanka.
When pressed if those are simply things that don't align with President Trump's policies, Leavitt said,
I would argue that all of these things are fraudulent, they are wasteful, and they are an abuse of the American taxpayer's dollar.
Last night, DOGE posted on its website what it called a wall of receipts to show its findings to date. So far, it has identified roughly $14 billion worth of federal program cuts, including at least 140 DEI contracts and grants. But all the money allocated was approved by Congress, and DOGE did not provide evidence of a single case of fraud or even alleged fraud.
President Trump and the White House keep conflating fraud, waste, and abuse. Does the distinction matter?
It does matter, and frankly, both sides are using terminology that's inaccurate and confusing the public.
Dave Walker led the Government Accountability Office for a decade, the congressional nonpartisan watchdog that investigates how taxpayer dollars are spent.
Most of the things that have been identified so far by DOGE represent waste and mismanagement, although waste is in the eye of the beholder. Very few things that they're talking about have risen to the level of being fraud. Fraud is illegal. On the other side, people who oppose DOGE are also using language that's inappropriate, saying that what they're doing is illegal or unconstitutional without providing any support for that.
Last week, President Trump cited a GAO report which found the U.S. government could lose between $233 and $521 billion a year to fraud. But that data was collected from 2018 to 2022, when fraudulent COVID payments soared.
How long does it take to find fraud? Can you find billions and billions of dollars in 1 month?
It would be difficult to find billions and billions of dollars in 1 month because you have to make a legal determination, which ultimately the courts decide. You can assert that something is fraud, but that doesn't mean that it is. It's ultimately a legal judgment.
CBS News has repeatedly asked the White House for examples of the fraud it claims DOGE has found. Officials referred us back to DOGE's website and social media accounts, and they did not make anyone available for an interview.
So, Weijia, why is this distinction important between what's merely waste and what is actually fraudulent?
Well, Dave Walker worries that repeating fraud claims undercuts trust in the government by the public, and critics are concerned that by alleging so much of it, Trump and his team have a license to take drastic measures at a breakneck pace without the proper oversight and transparency, which leaves room for error. Just tonight, the Department of Agriculture is scrambling to rehire staffers who are working on the response to the bird flu outbreak after they were accidentally fired.
CBS News has learned that President Trump is pausing all immigration applications filed by migrants from Ukraine and Latin America. The Department of Homeland Security told immigration reporter Camila Montoya Galvez that further vetting is needed.
And with cases already backed up, the president has fired 20 immigration judges. Jason Allen looks at the impact tonight.
Can we call you? We can't call you judge.
I don't think so. Not anymore. Ex-judge, I guess.
You're fully expecting.
I'm just full of Carrie.
Carrie Doyle was expecting to become one of the country's next immigration judges, but she was fired the week before she was supposed to start hearing cases.
There are millions of these cases.
3.7.
Which is a
million.
big reason why you thought maybe I won't disappear.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, that was the thought. That was the hope.
Inside this unmarked building in a Boston suburb, Doyle would have heard cases for asylum, permanent residence, and removal, up to 700 a year.
So you just see people every day, all day, with these life and death decisions over whether they can remain in the United States or not, and then neutrally applying the law.
In Boston and other cities, those cases stacked up as southern border crossings surged. And while crossings have come down, the case numbers, Doyle said, will keep adding up. There are about 4 million outstanding cases right now.
Don't forget that cases come into the system not just from the border, but from the existing people that are in the United States. So as you ramp up removal, they're getting put in front of the immigration judge. So that caseload will balloon.
We asked the Department of Justice why Doyle and other judges were terminated. A spokesperson declined to comment on personnel matters.
And yet, you expected this, in some sense.
I did, just because we were sort of the last group coming in under the Biden administration.
Doyle had been an outspoken critic of the immigration system when she was an immigration attorney. It landed her on a conservative-backed group's watch list of political appointees.
I took an oath to uphold the Constitution and to do my job. I'm not there to be an advocate. That's what I used to do when I, was with the client in the courtroom. Now I'm the decision maker, and you need to listen to both sides, and you need to weigh the case under the law and then act fairly to make decisions.
And Jason Allen joins us now. Jason, there's this backlog. So what is this going to do to the existing backlog of cases?
Well, it would take a lot to remove those, right? It takes a lot to become one of these judges. You'd have to have a law degree, 7 years of experience, right, to do this. The application process is long. It takes more than a year to get some of these judges into place. And there are some studies showing that we need as many as 300 new judges just to begin cutting into the backlog. That's a lot.
It's quite a backlog. So how does this influence the judges who are already on the job, Jason?
That's interesting. I talked to the president of the union that represents these judges, and he's talked to some of them that are still in their seats right now, and he described it as some of them on pins and needles, wondering if they could be next. He also talked about a potential chilling effect because it opens the door to judges questioning their own decision-making, wondering if their job could be at stake, and also a chilling effect in any others who might want to join the profession.
And quickly, Jason, what are any of these cases going to go away because Trump wants to deport?
No, he has expanded the criteria for expedited removal. That makes it easier to move some people out who have been here less than 2 years. But anybody who's been here more than 2 years still has constitutional protections. There are international obligations as well. They have to have a hearing so that they can make the case that they belong here.
President Trump today began the second month of his second term as head of the U.S. government, a government he is determined to shrink.
And he got some help today from a federal judge in Washington. The judge, an Obama appointee, refused to stop the president's mass firings of federal employees.
The judge said unions representing those workers must take their claims of wrongful firings to the Federal Labor Relations Authority. The chairwoman of that agency, a Biden appointee, is one of the people Mr. Trump fired.
Since the president was sworn in, he has taken aim at the federal workforce of 2.4 million and fired, laid off, or offered buyouts to untold thousands. And we say untold because the White House is not telling us exactly how many as the job cuts continue. But Weijia Jiang has been tracking down the jobs being eliminated. And Weijia, what have you found?
Well, we found that there is a group of more than 500,000 workers vulnerable to the administration's sweeping layoffs, and many serve in key positions across the federal government. For some who have already lost their jobs, they're now desperately looking for answers. Why?
I'm really not sure what I'm going to do.
Katie Sandlin is still living out of boxes after uprooting her life in Carbon Hill, Alabama last month, a town of 2,000, to work at the National Institutes of Health outside Washington, D.C.
I wiped out my savings account. I maxed out my credit card. I had to take out a loan.
But she called her job an opportunity of a lifetime, educating communities about NIH research.
People like me, where I'm from, rural Alabama, like these kind of jobs don't happen to people like me.
3 weeks later, Sandlin became one of thousands of federal probationary workers to be fired. They had less than 1, or in some cases, less than 2 years of experience, and fewer protections from layoffs, making them easier to terminate.
Now I'm unemployed, I have a ton of debt, and I'm also losing my health insurance.
Did it ever cross your mind that you could be fired in a second?
That part actually never crossed my mind.
Did your supervisor give you a reason for why you were getting fired?
They made it clear that I was not being terminated because of anything that I had done.
An HHS official sent Sandlin a letter saying your performance has not been adequate to justify further employment at the agency.
When I got it really upset me because it felt like it wasn't truthful. My boss, her boss, and even his boss all said that that was not true.
Our CBS News data team found that at the Veterans Health Administration, which implements the health care program for vets, probationary workers account for 30% of the staff. At the Department of Agriculture, it's 19% of the branch that performs food safety inspections. When it comes to air safety, about 1/3 of the TSA may be impacted. So far, 2,000 probationary workers at NIH have lost their jobs.
What does the public stand to lose with these widespread layoffs?
We are important and we do important work. We're impactful. And if you have questions or concerns about federal workers, ask one.
Weijia joins us now from the White House. Weijia, what does Katie do now?
Well, she says she can't afford to move back to Alabama after shelling out so much money to move here to the D.C. area, so she's focused on looking for a new job. But she points out how daunting that is, considering there are now thousands of federal workers in the same boat who are competing for those positions.
And Weijia, you showed us how many probationary workers are potentially vulnerable. Do we have any sense of any of them ending up like Katie, like how many that could amount to?
Well, just because they are probationary workers does not mean they will automatically be fired. In fact, depending on the agency, some are considered critical, and so they have exemptions. And remember, they can only be fired for poor performance or misconduct. In Katie's case, she says it was neither. So, John, that lawsuit you mentioned is just one of several, including class action lawsuits in the works.
The cuts keep coming. Now, President Trump is eliminating more than 6,700 jobs at the Internal Revenue Service, the agency that collects 96% of the money that funds the federal government.
And he's doing this at the height of tax season. When Americans are checking their mailboxes for the W-2s and 1099s, they need to fill out their 1040s.
And here's another number for you, 800-829-1040. That is the number many taxpayers will be calling to reach the IRS for help and hoping they'll reach an experienced agent to answer their questions.
Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes looks tonight at the impact of the IRS cuts on the workers and on Americans who depend on them. Nancy?
John, the cuts this week amount to about 6 to 8% of the IRS workforce, and sources tell us they don't believe these cuts are over yet. It's a sharp reversal for an agency that spent the past 2 years aggressively trying to boost staffing to become more responsive to taxpayers.
I always knew I wanted to work for the IRS. This was my dream job.
Today was day one of Elizabeth Crohn's job search. The 22-year-old from New Orleans was let go yesterday after just 6 months at the IRS, where she worked as an auditor on high-income tax returns.
We were already really needing more employees to handle the cases that we already had.
CBS News obtained an email that was sent to IRS workers this week. It said those being fired were newer probationary employees who were not deemed as critical to filing season.
What do we know about the people who are being let go?
I'm hearing that it is across all functions. So it includes people who provide taxpayer services and answers the phones.
Lily Batchelder is a tax policy expert and served as an assistant Treasury secretary under President Biden.
I just don't see how, when you suddenly fire thousands of employees in the middle of the filing season, that is not going to put the filing season at risk.
Administration officials say in any operation that is in debt, you would look to cut costs and lay off workers. Why isn't that a valid approach in this case?
Well, first of all, the IRS actually brings in revenue. So for every dollar that you invest in the IRS, it reduces budget deficits by $6.
Kevin Hassett, one of President Trump's top economic advisors, told reporters at the White House that all the federal job cuts will make agencies more efficient.
Nobody's going to the buildings. People aren't commuting because nobody's doing their job.
So you're saying that everybody who's being let go was doing a bad job?
I'm saying that we're studying every agency and deciding who to let go and why. And we're doing so very rationally with a lot of support from analysis.
I asked him about the many fired workers who, like Crohn, say they have no record of poor performance.
Yeah, I've never seen a person who was laid off for poor performance say that they were performing poorly.
Those statements are honestly an insult to me. Absolutely. Like I'm getting choked up thinking about that because that's offensive to me.
So Nancy, here we are in tax season. What kind of impact do we expect these cuts to have on the taxpayers?
Well, in the short term, Maurice, we'll probably see fewer audits of wealthy individuals and small businesses. Those audits bring in a lot of revenue. You could also start to see wait times to get someone on the phone begin to inch back up. They had come down pretty precipitously since 2022 when Congress passed $80 billion in additional funds to help the IRS modernize and hire more workers. Those are the very new workers who are now being shown the door.
Tonight, for the first time in his new administration, President Trump is spending the weekend in the nation's capital and across the Potomac, an extraordinary purge at the Pentagon. CBS's Willie James Inman is at the White House with details. Willie James, good evening.
Good evening to you, Jerika. President Trump spoke about his intentions for the military during a conservative conference after he fired some of the nation's top military leaders.
In an unprecedented move, President Trump fired 4-star General Charles C.Q. Brown, the nation's highest-ranking military officer. Trump called Brown a fine gentleman and an outstanding leader without giving a reason for his dismissal. The president said he will nominate 3-star Air Force Lieutenant General Dan Kane to replace General Brown. Brown is a highly decorated fighter pilot with over 40 years of service.
Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth to end the woke insanity and rebuild our military.
Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth said Brown served with distinction, but Hegseth has criticized so-called woke ideology deployed in the military.
You got to fire the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Any general that was involved, general, admiral, whatever, that was involved in any of the DEI woke, it's got to go.
Also ousted the Navy's top admiral Lisa Franchetti and Air Force Vice Chief of Staff James Slife. The leadership shakeup comes as the Pentagon, the government's biggest employer, prepares to fire at least 5,400 probationary employees next week.
I signed an order creating the Department of Government Efficiency, which is now waging war on government waste, fraud, and abuse.
This, as the president says he wants DOGE leader Elon Musk to get more aggressive with federal cuts.
Federal employees have begun receiving an email with instructions to reply with 5 bullet points about what they accomplished in the last week, with a deadline set for late Monday evening. Jerika?
Willie James Inman, thank you.
Elon Musk ordered federal employees who have been working from home to report to the office this week.
And ordered them to explain why they should have a job next week.
By giving him examples of what they accomplished last week. He demanded 5 examples by midnight tonight.
President Trump, whose accomplishments last week included firing federal employees, voiced support for Musk today. He claimed a lot of workers are not responding to Musk because, as the president put it, they don't exist.
But neither does any evidence of that claim. Many workers are not responding because their bosses told them they don't need to. Employees who work for the state, defense, justice, and homeland security departments.
Education, commerce, and transportation, on the other hand, told employees to respond. So there's a split in the administration, and Ed O'Keefe is at the White House tonight to try to sort this all out for us. Ed?
Hey guys, the Trump administration now telling agencies they can in fact ignore what Musk said entirely, adding even more confusion in the closing hours before a threatened deadline. To reply or not to reply? That was the question roiling the nation's 2 million plus federal employees.
The morale is, of course, abysmal right now. We are being told we're not worth the money that is spent on us.
Workers, including Alex Berman with the Internal Revenue Service, were dumbfounded by Elon Musk, who on Saturday told the rank and file they'd have to share what they got done last week. Failure to respond, he said, will be taken as a resignation. It's something Musk also asked Twitter employees to do when he started layoffs there. A formal email from the Office of Personnel Management asked federal employees for replies by 11:59 p.m. tonight, with approximately 5 bullets of what you accomplished last week.
This is just another step in the demonization and harassment of employees who have only worked to serve the American people. The other thing is, who's going to read 2.4 million questionnaires?
Adding to the confusion was that decision by several of the largest federal departments to instruct workers not to comply. President Trump backed up Musk's original demands today.
I thought it was great because we have people that don't show up to work and nobody even knows if they work for the government.
Alex Berman worries this kind of request will further erode the quality of the nation's public servants.
They are hounding good people and good workers out of the civil service. This will be taken as another anecdotal piece of evidence saying that we're not the good workers we know we are.
Ed O'Keefe joins us from the White House. So Ed, when the music stops, what is the final White House guidance on this?
Well, this afternoon, it turns out, they told the heads of human resources, essentially, at all these departments, don't worry about what Musk sent around. You decide what goes on personnel-wise at your departments. But it was a pretty public split, right? You had the FBI director, Kash Patel, the defense secretary, Pete Hegseth, 2 of the president's most loyal advocates out there for him, saying, ignore Elon Musk. You had the commerce secretary, Howard Lutnick, the treasury secretary, Scott Bessent, saying, no, listen to Musk. So amid that split today, the White House press secretary tells us, quote, everyone is working together as one unified team at the direction of President Trump. Any notion to the contrary is completely false.
And among these workers, there's real fear out there. Is that the whole idea?
It was the whole idea, Maurice. In fact, the person who's now serving as White House budget director told ProPublica last summer that he wanted to, quote, he wanted to make sure federal employees were, quote, traumatically affected by the changes that they would be making across the workforce. Whether they've reached the trauma stage or not is unclear, but it is certain federal employees tonight upset and mighty confused by what's going on.
This time he means it. Maybe.
Elon Musk says he is giving federal workers another chance to respond to his email demand for a list of 5 things they accomplished last week or be fired. He did not set a new deadline.
The White House says 1 million responses were received by the original deadline last night. One response we got to see is from Caroline Leavitt, the president's press secretary.
And Musk faced a revolt today in his Department of Government Efficiency. 21 staffers resigned, saying they would not be part of dismantling critical public services.
Even with that, even with different agencies giving employees different instructions about the Musk demand, Press Secretary Leavitt said Musk, the president, and the cabinet are working as one unified team. Nancy Cordes is at the White House for us tonight trying to keep track of all of this. Nancy.
Maurice, even some congressional Republicans began to argue today that Elon Musk and DOGE are making calls and giving orders that are best left to cabinet heads, because now there are more than 1 million federal employees who aren't sure exactly what to do, and the guidance they got from President Trump himself this afternoon didn't make things any clearer.
It's somewhat voluntary, but it's also, if you don't answer, I guess you get fired.
There were new mixed messages from the White House today, with Special Advisor Elon Musk now threatening termination for federal employees who don't respond to an email asking what they did last week. The threat comes even after many federal agencies told workers not to respond to the email.
We're being inundated with calls.
Randy Irwin runs the NFFE, a union that represents 110,000 federal workers.
Mainly, they're asking technical questions. Do I have to respond to this? Why? This is not in my chain of command. They also want to know, what are they looking for?
The confusion is sparking new questions about the power and structure of DOGE, the operation President Trump created to spearhead massive job cuts. At a court hearing yesterday, government lawyers were not able to identify who runs DOGE, nor would White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt today. Who is the DOGE administrator?
So the president tasked Elon Musk to oversee the DOGE effort. There are career officials and there are political appointees who are helping run DOGE on a day-to-day basis.
So is Elon Musk the administrator?
Reagan. Thanks, Caroline.
She later suggested there is someone in charge. She just wouldn't say who.
I'm not going to reveal the name of that individual from this podium.
CBS News was told late today that the acting administrator is Amy Gleason, a veteran of the first Trump administration. When reached earlier today by phone, Gleason said she was in Mexico and declined further comment.
And Nancy joins us now from the White House. Nancy, I want to ask you about these 21 employees who left and resigned from DOGE. Who are they, and why did they say they're leaving?
So, Don, these are tech experts who were already working to modernize federal computer systems before their operation was kind of absorbed by DOGE. And they say that what they saw DOGE doing was making government less efficient, not more. They wrote, quote, "We will not use our skills as technologists to compromise core government systems, jeopardize Americans' sensitive data, or dismantle critical public services." They issued this resignation letter anonymously, but they say they all left senior roles in the tech industry in order to go work for federal government.
So, Nancy, what about all these other federal employees wondering tonight, do I respond? Do I quit? What do I do? What's the best advice tonight?
So the advice that unions are giving their workers and members is that if they've gotten instructions from their agency not to respond, then don't. Otherwise, if they can't get guidance from a superior, they should go ahead and answer it, because it's possible their job could be on the line.
The White House won't say how many federal workers have been or will be fired.
But Ian Lee tracked down 3 of them in Wyoming, and they told Ian what their firing could mean for the rest of us.
Even in the winter, the Shoshone National Forest buzzes with activity, with so many people snowmobiling, riding their bikes, hiking, and rock climbing. Maintaining the country's forests takes an army of Forest Service workers, including Dalen Grindle.
What did you love most about your job?
I loved going into work every day and being able to work with my colleagues.
Grindle, along with Jack Corney and Tim Leedy, recently received a letter that said they were being fired for poor job performance.
What was your reaction when you saw that the reason you were being fired was because of poor performance?
You know, I put my heart and soul into that job, and that's just not true.
Every summer, tens of millions of Americans visit the national forests, but this summer, they might look a little different.
There's a lot of unforeseen consequences that the general public aren't always aware of.
What do you fear then? What could happen?
We're clearing the trails for people to access the wilderness, and that's not going to happen this year.
Let's say you just arrived in town and you want some information about the forest, maybe a good place to camp or trail to hike on, or maybe you're scared about bears. You come to a place like this, your local ranger station. But because of the recent firings, this one won't be open anytime soon. Terminations at the Forest Service also come as wildfires nationwide grow fiercer and more frequent.
Show of hands, How many of you were qualified to fight fires? So you guys could all have been on the front lines this summer fighting fires if needed.
Yes.
I spoke with several senior Forest Service officials across the country, and they told me the future leadership of the agency has been wiped out and it could take decades to recover. Another warned that some of these workers monitored bear populations, and without them, there could be more encounters.
We have a lot of people that were scamming our country.
Surrounded by his cabinet, President Trump warned that far deeper cuts are coming than the ones imposed so far, including potentially a 65% budget cut at the Environmental Protection Agency, which safeguards the nation's air and water.
This country has gotten bloated and fat and disgusting and incompetently run.
Just before he spoke, a memo went out to all government agency heads instructing them to undertake preparations to initiate large-scale reductions in force, consistent with applicable law. What is applicable law? Can they just fire anyone they want?
No, they can't just fire anyone they want.
Jim Eisenman is a labor lawyer who represents federal workers.
Agencies are allowed in certain circumstances to conduct reductions in force. If there's a lack of money, lack of resources, lack of work, the longer you've been in a job, the greater the chance you have of staying in the job.
In federal court today, U.S. Special Counsel Hampton Dellinger argued Trump hasn't followed the rules for firing newer workers. Dellinger's job is to protect federal employees, but the White House is trying to fire him.
We believed that this mass firing of probationary employees, based on the first complaints that we received about it, is in violation of the law.
At his cabinet meeting today, President Trump lavished praise on Elon Musk, who has rankled some cabinet members by making cuts in their agencies without their buy-in.
Is anybody unhappy with Elon? If you are, well, throw him out of here. Is anybody unhappy?
Musk argued his work has come at a personal cost.
And taking a lot of flack, and getting a lot of death threats, by the way. But if we don't do this, America will go bankrupt. That's why it has to be done.
And Nancy joins us now from Washington at the White House. Nancy, give us a sense of the timeline for this next wave of cuts.
Well, John, according to this memo from the OMB, the agencies only have about 2.5 weeks to submit their reduction in force plans, which is a very tight time frame when you consider that most of these cabinet secretaries have only been on the job a couple of weeks themselves. They're still getting to know their agencies. Then they're going to have a proposed 30 days to plan for the cuts, and then by law, they have to give employees 30 to 60 days notice of the reduction in force. So if they stick to this schedule, we could be looking at major cuts as soon as May or June.
Nancy, Musk said today, we're going to make mistakes and we're going to correct them. But a main criticism of these firings is that they've been just simply too fast. All of which brings us to what happened at the VA today.
Right. So it was just a couple of days ago that the VA secretary was touting $2 billion worth of cuts to contracts. But now all of those cuts have been put on hold after lawmakers complained that they were going to affect everything from veterans' cancer care to doctor recruiting. Going forward, the VA now says they will only be cutting things that are not mission critical.
We begin this evening with another shift in U.S. foreign policy. For 60 years, the United States has believed that foreign aid in the form of international grants to provide food, medical care, and other humanitarian aid would stabilize the chaotic world. Today, the Trump administration dismissed nearly $60 billion in foreign aid grants and contracts. That point was magnified by the scene at the old U.S. Agency for International Development building, where workers had just minutes to clear out their desks after President Trump placed them on leave earlier this week. CBS's Nancy Cordes joins us from the White House. And Nancy, several grants have been cut from USAID. What can you tell us about those grants?
Well, in total, John, we are looking at $58 billion worth of cuts, which translates, believe it or not, to 92% of all of the contracts that USAID gives out to organizations that do humanitarian work and development work around the world. This is one of the final steps in essentially dismantling the agency. A State Department spokesperson said that they examined more than 15,000 grants and awards and decided at the end of the day that most of them just did not fit the president's America First agenda.
Also on the America First agenda, or at least being introduced to it in person, was the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, who was at the White House. How did that go?
Well, Starmer was very complimentary, always a good approach for foreign leaders. They talked a lot about winding down the war in Ukraine. They talked a lot about this minerals deal that the president is close to signing with the Ukrainian president. And they also talked a lot, John, about the tariffs, the reciprocal tariffs that President Trump has vowed to impose on countries around the world, friend or foe. Starmer worked very hard over lunch to convince the president not to impose those tariffs on the UK. The president said he was a good deal maker and that he thought that they could work something out.
So maybe a little bit of light there on that question for the UK?
Sure, and it also shows that if leaders come to the bargaining table with something that they're willing to offer the president instead, that perhaps he'll be willing to take them up on it.
They're all taking notes. You talk to the various diplomats in these foreign capitals. They're all taking notes as each one comes through the White House. Nancy, also the president addressed earlier these cuts in the federal workforce. It's hard to keep up with the various rounds of them. You reported on them again last night. What's the latest on those?
Well, I asked the president today about the DOGE cuts that have affected federal workers who are veterans, because the Democrats estimate that about 6,000 veterans have lost their jobs in these DOGE cuts so far. Take a listen to what he had to say. Veterans make up 30% of the federal workforce. Are you tracking how many veterans have been fired so far, and do you want DOGE to avoid letting them go?
We take good care of our veterans, so we're watching that very carefully, and we hope it's going to be as small a number as possible. But we are having great success in slimming down our government. It's been really very successful, and some took payouts and buyouts, and others took other things, and some people we're finding out don't even exist. We're finding that we have a lot of people that don't exist, that people thought that did.
There are a lot of veterans who are vulnerable to these cuts because they're probationary workers. They've only been on the job for a year or two. They don't have those civil service protections, even though they served in the military in uniform for years, if not decades, John.
A bipartisan group of former U.S. defense secretaries are now asking Congress to investigate the Trump administration's firing of top brass at the Pentagon. That's according to a letter obtained by the Associated Press. For tonight's In Depth, CBS's national security correspondent Charlie D'Agata reports on another Pentagon purge that could be more alarming.
The firings at the Pentagon are now reaching beyond Joint Chiefs Chairman C.Q. Brown and Chief of Naval Operations Admiral Lisa Franchetti to the top lawyers in the Army, Navy, and Air Force Judge Advocates General. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth ordered the JAG firings.
We want lawyers who give sound constitutional advice and don't exist to attempt to be roadblocks to anything.
Among other responsibilities, JAGs provide advice to U.S. senior military officers on the rules of warfare and are sometimes embedded with forces on the battlefield to ensure they adhere to them. Corey Shockey, head of defense policy at the conservative American Enterprise Institute, is troubled by the firings.
What concerns you most about the relief of the JAGs?
They are the people who advise military commanders on what is lawful and what is not. And I worry that their relief by the secretary sends a message that he is encouraging lawlessness by the force or tolerant of lawlessness by the force.
Hegseth's move comes after the unprecedented terminations of Brown and Franchetti.
By cashiering the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Chief of Naval Operations, it is sending a message that you don't value the talent that's in the force.
To replace Brown, the president has chosen Air Force Lieutenant General Dan Raisin Kane, who will come out of retirement to take the job.
Yeah, I think generally it sends a poor signal to the force when you recall from retirement someone to put in the leadership. I don't know General Kane, but we shouldn't lack confidence that he is serious about the undertaking.
An undertaking that will involve following the orders of a commander-in-chief and defense secretary who are bringing dramatic change to the Pentagon.
Has the Trump administration just politicized the military?
I think they are making a number of choices that have the potential to dangerously politicize the military.
Another big change at the Pentagon. CBS News has learned the president has given military commanders broader authority to launch counterterrorism airstrikes. Charlie D'Agata, CBS News at the Pentagon.
President Trump is giving the heads of federal agencies until next week to submit plans for eliminating more government jobs. The thousands being cut in the mass firings are much more than numbers on a payroll list, and every one of them has a story. Caitlin Huey-Burns has tonight's Eye on America.
What do you want for lunch today, Mom? We joined Kate Scaife Friday morning as she made her kids lunch, dropped them off at the bus stop, and headed to her office at USAID, where she was a program analyst. Scaife was one of thousands of federal employees who received an email saying they're being affected by a reduction in force, government speak for "you're fired."
It has been one of the hardest months of my life. To feel that I did something wrong when all we were trying to do was the right thing.
They are increasingly viewed as the villains.
That's top Trump official Russell Vought talking to his right-wing think tank in 2023. Vought has helped billionaire Elon Musk carry out the mass firings across the federal government. Last week, Vought sent this memo directing agencies to plan for a significant reduction in the number of full-time workers, an effort to shrink the government that could ultimately leave 700,000 federal employees across the country out of a job.
We want to put them in trauma.
That trauma was on display Friday as USAID workers left the building for the last time.
USAID saves lives.
That's how you would have described your work?
That's right. We make America safer.
For the last 2 years, Kate Scaife's job was to make thousands of humanitarian programs around the world run efficiently, a role she optimistically believed would match the priorities of the new administration.
One of our senior leaders came up to me at one point, passed me in the hall, and said, "Be prepared to be the most popular girl in the room in a couple of weeks."
Her illusions faded last month when Musk tweeted about feeding USAID into the wood chipper. The next day, Scaife couldn't log on to her work devices.
I felt disappeared, right? All of our work was made invisible too.
We rode with Scaife as she drove to the office.
I've got my kids' pictures.
You leave it there thinking you'll get it back.
And it'll be there on Monday. Yeah. Right.
She was allowed 15 minutes to clean out her desk.
It just felt really demeaning to be treated like that.
Scaife had been the breadwinner in her family. How do you talk to your kids about this?
It was so hard to tell them things like, we've made summer plans for these camps and, I can't afford that.
It feels like work was a big part of your identity.
I feel like I am my best mom when I have this other part of me that helps me to feel engaged with the world. I don't know how I'll find something new that gives me that same joy.
A feeling now looming for hundreds of thousands of federal workers. For Eye on America, I'm Caitlin Huey-Burns in Silver Spring, Maryland.
President Trump's policies in these early days of his second term are creating uncertainty across the country. Cuts he's making in foreign food aid could have a major impact in America's heartland, where much of the food is grown. Nicole Killian reports from Larned, Kansas.
John Dryden's family has farmed in western Kansas for more than a century. He grows wheat, corn, soybeans, and sorghum, or milo.
We may switch to more corn, dry land acres, just knowing there's usually always a market for corn.
So you may grow corn instead of milo?
More corn than milo, yes.
Since USAID's Food for Peace program has been suspended, there is virtually no market for milo, according to Kim Barnes.
This is the milo that you're talking about.
This is the milo crop. They make flour out of it. It goes into pet food, ethanol. You eat it.
He's with the Pawnee County Co-op that purchases grain from farmers including Dryden. Now, instead of selling it, he's storing it.
When you're sitting here on 1.7 million bushels of milo, you kind of like to see it move on to the next step. especially when we have people in the world that are hungry.
So while this program is paused, what are you doing?
Well, right now I'm turning over every rock I can find.
Until he finds buyers, he's worried the co-op and the community may take a loss.
The person downtown's not going to sell any furniture. The grocery stores are going to be affected. People just aren't going to buy.
But Dryden is still going to farm.
We're throwing punches all the time, basically. Drought, hailstorms, insects. This is just another punch.
How many more punches can you take?
I don't know.
I'm Skylar Henry in Fitzgerald, Georgia, where cuts in Washington to USAID are threatening this rural economy.
What's the cost of one box?
One box is about $40.
Mark Moore is the CEO of the nonprofit Manna Nutrition, which makes a peanut paste to feed starving kids in war zones and famines.
If the system stops, to catch back up, it'll cost not just time, but lives, thousands, if not tens of thousands of lives.
What Moore makes is pretty simple. Take peanuts, blend it with milk, sugar, and vitamins. The result might not look like much, but he says it can work miracles. But not while the federal contract he has counted on for years is in limbo.
We're on, and then we're off, and then we're back on again.
He says he received a stop work order on January 29th, then told to resume 8 days later, then had his contracts canceled. And late Sunday, they were reinstated again. And with 130 employees, Manna is one of the top employers in Ben Hill County, 3 hours outside of Atlanta.
My first priority is my people.
Jason Holt is the mayor of Fitzgerald.
Manna is a 2 or 3-fold contributor to our economy. They purchase raw products, they employ people, and they serve a great humanitarian purpose.
What's your hope?
I hope they continue to grow.
For Mayor Holt, keeping the economy healthy here is personal.
I have a graduating senior coming up. He has a path in mind. He would like to come home, and I want Fitzgerald to be here for him to come home too.
And Skylar Henry joins us now from Atlanta, Georgia. Skylar, this isn't just about one product or one company. Give us a sense of some of the ripple effects here.
Yeah, John, this is many farmers in many states. Manna says that it relies or it can get a supply from as many as 27 states, but they really rely on a handful, and that is milk from Michigan and Texas. They get their sugar from Louisiana and Florida, and then they obviously get their peanuts from right here in Georgia. All of those farmers would have to find alternative places to send their products.
In tonight's address, President Trump is expected to highlight the Department of Government Efficiency's work in cutting the federal workforce. Those reductions have resulted in thousands of newly hired workers losing jobs with little or no notice. For tonight's In Depth, Karen Waugh reports that the move has upended the entire lives of many of the workers.
It's a perennial question. How far would you go for your dream job?
I actually worked 7 days a week for a few weeks just to get my foot in the door.
How much would you sacrifice?
How much did the camper cost?
$16,000. But now, these two women who worked in Arkansas's Ozark National Forest are among at least 1,000 other National Park Service workers terminated in the wave of federal mass firings.
I feel very disrespected.
Leah Safian had 10 days to move and start her job, so she borrowed thousands to buy this camper. She was let go 3 weeks in.
I cycle through being angry, sad, distressed.
National Park Service jobs range from collecting entrance fees to cleaning up trash to search and rescue missions. The National Park Service oversees more than 85 million acres across the U.S., like the Buffalo National River here. It's one of the only places I can go to and just kind of completely forget everything that's going on.
Stacy Ramsey worked here as the only permanent river ranger, saving dozens of hikers and boaters on search and rescue missions.
I'm sure I'll have to eventually.
This job is more than a dream or income for her.
This is the $27,500 Stelara injection.
Every 8 weeks, Stacy has given herself a shot worth almost her yearly salary, all to manage her Crohn's disease. With health insurance, it was $5, but now her health care expires in less than 30 days. And without the shot, she could end up in the hospital.
These thousands of employees terminated are all real people. They're all people who have families, who have mortgages, utility bills, bills to pay.
For both women, finding a job with benefits is harder because they moved to the remote Ozarks.
I'm not going to, live my life at the end of a string. I have to come up with another plan to make this work.
They're left wondering if their sacrifices paid off.
That's all my uniforms, keeping them just in case. Hopefully I'll get it back into the Park Service eventually.
A dream job now gone that even the beauty of the national parks can overshadow. Karen Hua, CBS News, the Ozarks of Arkansas.
The mass firing of federal workers is starting to come into focus. A report out today says more than 62,000 U.S. government jobs were cut in February. That brought the overall job losses to 172,000, the highest total for any month since the pandemic. The Department of Government Efficiency, which is behind the firings, does not put out a complete accounting, but our teams here at CBS News have found that cuts by DOGE have affected at least 18 federal departments and agencies. The Social Security Administration said last Friday it is cutting about 7,000 workers. The Department of Defense announced plans to cut about 5,400 probationary employees. And in the most significant job reduction so far, an internal memo from the Department of Veterans Affairs revealed the VA plans to cut 15% of its workforce by the end of September. Carter Evans in Los Angeles spoke to a combat veteran who is worried about the impact of the VA cuts.
These are my 2 meritorious service medals.
U.S. Army veteran Rob Ham was 18 when terrorists attacked on 9/11.
I remember watching it and just feeling like, whoa, this world is changed and it's violent and scary.
And you felt like you needed to do something.
I did.
He served several tours in Afghanistan as a paratrooper and combat photographer. His unit often close to highly toxic pits used to burn waste.
I definitely had some chest stuff when I came back.
Are you worried that it might become an issue?
When I look at the statistics, the odds of me getting some kind of related cancer that I will need help from the VA is very high.
Ham had produced videos for the VA documenting medical professionals caring for cancer patients and treating homeless veterans.
Rolling back the level of employees that cover all of these different services is going to impact care, 100%.
Look, the VA was never perfect, and it will never be perfect.
A message posted on X by VA Secretary Doug Collins explained the massive layoffs authorized by DOGE would shrink the number of VA employees by 72,000.
We'll be making major changes, so get used to it. Right now, VA's biggest problem is that its bureaucracy and inefficiencies are getting in the way of customer convenience and service to veterans.
The VA has been plagued by scandals in recent years, but the agency did have someone overseeing the organization. Inspector General Michael Missel was fired.
We identified fraud, waste, and abuse every day of the year. It's really hard to come in and just start cutting positions without really understanding the implications of those cuts.
I believe we're going to overcome this. I believe when you start to piss off veterans, we rise together. We should rise together. When we as a country send people to war, we have a sacred obligation to take care of them when they come home. Full stop.
And Carter Evans tells us many of the new VA employees were hired during the Biden administration to provide services under the PACT Act. It expanded benefits for soldiers who, like Rob Ham, were exposed to toxins. President Trump's firing of federal workers has been so rapid and so haphazard, it's been hard to figure out what the impact might be on the rest of us. But we could find out the next time there's a natural disaster.
Because among those fired are more than 200 workers at FEMA, including the chief financial officer. In her first interview, Mary Comans told me her firing came after she alleges Elon Musk spread false claims about her work.
My name has been slandered. I've been personally attacked. My family has been harassed.
President Trump denied me of my rights.
For 2 decades, Mary Comans was an unknown bureaucrat at the Department of Homeland Security until one Tuesday afternoon when the world's richest man posted her photo on X to his 219 million followers, calling her actions criminal.
I'm apolitical. I've served both Republican and Democrat presidents with honor and integrity.
Most recently as the chief financial officer for the disaster relief agency FEMA. In early February, Coleman says one of Elon Musk's top lieutenants, Brad Smith, zeroed in on a program approved by Congress to reimburse cities and states for housing undocumented migrants.
He specifically asked, he said, have you paused payments to state and local entities? And my colleague who oversees the grants program responded, no. And Brad Smith said, that's the right answer. Payments to state and local entities should continue under the normal process and procedures.
So you're thinking at that point?
That we were squared away.
Squared away until 5 days later, when Musk posted, the DOGE team just discovered that FEMA sent $59 million last week to New York City to house illegal migrants, saying the agency violated the law.
That really came as a surprise to me and my colleagues.
Did you document all of this, what happened?
I did.
But it didn't matter. The next morning, a colleague delivered the news. Coleman's had been fired at the direction of the president. The official Department of Homeland Security had put out a press release here. It says, you were fired for circumventing leadership to unilaterally make egregious payments for luxury New York City hotels for migrants.
That is not a true statement. I was fired illegally by the Trump administration for doing my job.
In that same press release, the agency called Coleman's a deep state activist.
I feel betrayed, not by my colleagues, but by a department, an agency that I gave my life to.
Now, Brad Smith, a DOGE official, did not respond to our request for a comment. Neither did a spokesman for the Department of Homeland Security. Mary Coleman's has filed a lawsuit against the department, asking for damages, alleging defamation, and that her firing was illegal.
Maurice, targeted by the richest man in the world on Twitter and all that, does Coleman's feel physically in danger?
She absolutely does. She feels threatened. She feels that other people are out there using her name badly, saying terrible things about her. She's called the local police, changed her movement. She's got the police keeping an eye on her and her family. Whew. Yeah, tough moment.
Yeah. CBS News has learned another wave of mass firings could be hitting the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. The agency, which includes the National Weather Service, could ultimately lose about 20% of its staff. For tonight's In Depth, CBS's senior meteorologist Rob Marciano reports the cuts are already raising concerns over public safety.
Hundreds of protesters rally outside the NOAA headquarters in Silver Spring, Maryland. Fired employees chant messages of support to their remaining colleagues looking down from above.
NOAA's people are here to help.
Sarah Cooley was the head of NOAA's Office of Ocean Acidification and studied how warming waters impact ecosystems until she was fired in DOGE cuts.
I just put my head down on my desk and I cried. It was just gutting.
There's concern that key jobs are being lost in science.
That's the number one motivation, is putting science to work.
These are just a few of the 880 NOAA employees fired across the country. A majority were probationary workers with less than 2 years in their position, who suddenly found themselves terminated.
My job in the last hour that I had at work was to pass off every pending activity to my deputy, because now he's going to be acting director of the program.
In addition to the staffing cuts, DOGE announced it may terminate the leases of 19 NOAA offices across the country, including key buildings that generate vital weather forecasts and maintain radar operations.
These cuts were indiscriminate. They were based not on any particular mission priorities.
Rick Spinrad was the administrator of NOAA during the Biden administration, departing when President Trump took office, and is worried how it impacts the National Weather Service.
It most assuredly will affect the availability, the frequency, and the accuracy, honestly, of the warnings. There's a big capital expense associated with that. Airplanes, radars, satellites. Who's going to pick those up? And we don't have the capability to sustain or replace those.
This is the United States Department of Commerce. NOAA is a part of it, a big part. Matter of fact, it makes up over half of its budget with its 12,000 employees, and over 6,000 of those are scientists and engineers. And more firings are likely coming. Where do you think we're going with all of this?
I think at some point people are going to recognize we need these capabilities for the public good, which after all is the role of government. The question is, how much damage will we sustain before we're able to turn around the damage that's already been done?
Rob Marciano, CBS News, Silver Spring, Maryland.
The post office says it will eliminate 10,000 jobs through voluntary retirement. More than 11% of its employees are military veterans. The post office says it values the skills they bring to the job.
Vets make up 30% of the overall federal workforce. Many who were new on the job were fired in the Trump-Musk purge. Nancy Cordes reports they feel their years of service are not being valued at all.
Jonathan Hairston has served his country for nearly 8 years, including 6 in uniform, doing counterintelligence in the U.S. Army.
I took an oath to protect and serve this country against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And right now, our rights as civil servants, as public servants, it's all in question.
Hairston worked as a civilian AI specialist until 3 weeks ago, when he was fired as part of a purge at CISA, the agency responsible for government cybersecurity. The form letter Hairston received claimed he was not fit for continued employment.
I feel like I've been dishonorably discharged without any voice of concern, no answers to any questions.
Your service was disregarded.
Service was disregarded.
It's estimated at least 6,000 veterans have lost their government jobs over the past month.
Kind of ironic.
Many of them are disabled vets, like Stephen Dow.
And then they said, you have about 5 minutes, pack up your personal things.
Dow served in the Air Force for 20 years. A blast in Afghanistan left him with a broken neck.
Why did you decide to look for a job with the federal government?
Because I want to continue to serve.
He started working as an executive assistant at the Pentagon 9 months ago.
I mean, your review says you have a mastery of technology. Steve sets the standard for productivity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You were good at your job.
I was. Yeah, I take initiative for things. I find things that are broken and try to fix them. And that's ingrained in me from when I was in the military.
Did you vote for President Trump?
I did 3 times.
Why?
Because I thought he was the right person for the job. And I didn't expect this.
So what's your message to him now?
Take a closer look.
I asked President Trump about that the other day.
Are you tracking how many veterans have been fired so far?
Yes,
and do you want DOGE to avoid letting them go?
We are, and we take good care of our veterans, so we're watching that very carefully.
But CBS News has found no evidence that the administration is tracking veteran layoffs or trying to prevent them.
It's harmful to the mental health of veterans, right? Some of us have lost friends and family members serving this country. To get treated like this, it's a disservice to their lives. It's a disservice to our service.
And Nancy Cordes joins us from the White House. Nancy, today a federal judge said the Trump administration has to rehire those probationary employees that they fired. And the judge said basically this is because the Trump administration fired them on false pretenses?
Right. He says that in many cases, these workers were told that they were poor performers when there's evidence that that was simply not true. Now, this case is going to continue to work its way through the courts, but it underscores the fact that these probationary employees, like the ones that I spoke to, they do have some rights. You can't just fire them without cause, and that's why the government claimed they were poor performers. But when it comes to veterans in particular, John, there's a reason why the federal government has always prioritized hiring them. It's because they tend to be prompt, they're experienced, they're dedicated to the mission. They tend to be among the best performers.
At this point, Nancy, does it seem that they have any hope of being reinstated?
They told me they do have hope. They want to go back to their jobs, but that puts them in a kind of limbo. They know they need to start looking for new jobs, even as they wait to see whether they'll be reinstated. And this is a challenge not just for them, but for so many workers. And they know that more cuts, potentially even deeper cuts, are coming. So even if they do get their old jobs back, they could be fired again.
Okay, Nancy Cordes on the story from the White House tonight. Thank you.
For more than 80 years, Voice of America has been just that, America's largest government-sponsored broadcaster. And its mission is to spread American values around the world. But now VOA is going silent after the Trump administration put the entire staff on administrative leave. For tonight's In Depth, CBS's chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes reports on what this means.
Moscow this week.
This is what overseas viewers might have seen on Voice of America last week, and this is what they saw today. A short 30-second video promising that VOA will represent America, though how and when is unclear.
I got an email from HR on Saturday morning. That's when I first learned what was going on.
Michael Abramowitz is the director of VOA. He and all 1,300 employees were placed on administrative leave this weekend after the White House labeled VOA radical propaganda.
I really believe that at VOA, the journalists, by and large, if they have a bias, they hate totalitarianism, they hate tyranny, they hate authoritarianism.
VOA was founded in 1942, broadcasting behind enemy lines and later behind the Iron Curtain.
Here's how jamming sounds when it cuts in on a Voice of America broadcast.
Today, VOA reaches about 360 million people around the world each week and is translated into about 50 different languages. The budget is just over $250 million a year.
Our principal mission is really to tell the story of America.
So you're getting through to an audience that otherwise might only hear propaganda about the U.S.
That's the idea.
Trump officials say VOA has been too critical of the commander-in-chief. Trump himself made his distaste clear last week when he got a question from a VOA reporter.
Who are you with?
I'm with Voice of America, sir.
Oh, no wonder. Okay, Voice of
Chinese state media cheered the halting of VOA, calling the outlet a lie factory with an appalling track record.
Right now, VOA is shuttered, and it could be a major, really self-inflicted blow to the national security interests of the United States.
Why is that?
Because it's an incredibly important tool for basically combating Chinese, Russian, Iranian disinformation, for telling the truth to people living under tyranny. If America pulls off the playing field and cedes it to our adversaries, then they're going to be telling the narratives that people around the world are going to be hearing, and that can't be good for America.
They're going to be hearing an anti-American message.
They're going to be hearing an anti-American narrative, and we need to fight that.
A fight that's been knocked off the airwaves for now. Nancy Cordes, CBS News, Washington.
The latest targets of President Trump's government cutbacks include Radio Free Asia. Its stated mission is to provide fair, objective, accurate, and uncensored news and information to Asian nations where there are few, if any, free speech protections.
Today was the last day on the job for hundreds of RFA employees, and Margaret Brennan reports some of them fear they could be deported.
After the 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre, Congress created Radio Free Asia to broadcast facts into countries where governments are afraid of them. RFA President Bei Fang.
The U.S. saw China gunning down its own citizens and then also successfully covering it up afterwards. The U.S. Congress created us with an eye to giving these people in China and other authoritarian countries around Asia the ability to have free press.
So bringing free speech to places where free speech is prohibited.
Exactly.
Fang put 75% of the staff on leave. We saw journalists saying their goodbyes in the newsroom. It's a result of the funding cuts ordered by the U.S. Agency for Global Media's Carrie Lake.
Costing you, the taxpayer, a fortune.
At least 8 RFA journalists could be forced to leave the U.S. if they lose their work visas. Vietnamese journalist Khoa Lai is one of them.
Do you think you will be deported?
I believe so, but I hope not. I believe that if I go back, then the government will snatch me right away.
5 who worked for RFA are already behind bars overseas. RFA funds their families and their defense.
These are not U.S. citizens, but they are people who are in jail because they worked for a U.S.-funded network.
So a decision like this has a blast radius that impacts a lot of people.
Yep.
If you need Congress to continue with these grants, how do you convince them you're worth saving?
We're worth saving because we actually bring benefit to the U.S. taxpayer. I think it is in the U.S. national security interest. We are actually one of the lowest cost effective elements of soft power that they could have.
Soft power meaning influence without military force.
Exactly.
And Margaret Brennan joins us now. So, Margaret, what would replace RFA? Have they got a plan?
You know, Maurice, I have asked people in the Trump administration and in Congress that question, and no one has offered or explained any plans to refurbish or replace RFA, just to dismantle it. Now, in the meantime, RFA tells us that unless the courts or Congress or a private financier steps in, they only have enough money to continue broadcasting for about another month. They've actually already started to dim their radio transmitters that broadcast into closed countries like North Korea and China.
Margaret, these journalists who worked for an American-funded entity that are in danger, is there anything that the U.S. can do to try to help them, or anybody else try to help them?
Well, Radio Free Asia does plan to go to court to try to force the Trump administration to release the funds so they can get these journalists back to work. You know, the journalist we introduced you to there said he came to this country so he could freely report back to his home nation. And, you know, one of the things that we did was go to the State Department and say, what's going to happen with the visas for these at-risk journalists? And we were told they can try to apply for asylum while they remain on U.S. soil. There's no plan.
Turning now to the fate of Social Security, today on Capitol Hill, senators asked Trump's nominee to head the agency, financial technology executive Frank Bisignano, about customer service, wait times, the system's financial condition, and cuts by Elon Musk's team. Democrats wanted to know about privatization. Bisignano said he hadn't thought about it. I talked to the last commissioner, Martin O'Malley, about his concerns about what the agency is facing.
I believe it'll cascade into the sort of collapse that actually interrupts benefits for some period of time.
No checks. People expecting checks each month won't show up.
You cannot fail to put oil in an old car, fail to maintain an old car, and expect that that engine won't lock.
The 57,000 employees of the Social Security Administration administer $1.5 trillion a year in benefits to 73 million people. Already at a 50-year staffing low, more than 5,000 employees have been pushed out since Donald Trump and Elon Musk have targeted the office. How will people start to see the difficulties that you think are coming?
By September, we had reduced the speed to answer on the 1-800 number, which serves 8 million people a month, call that. We had reduced that from an average of 42.5 minutes to 12.4 minutes. That's back up. Last month it was around a half hour. The wait times for disability determinations are going back up. The wait that you're going to have if you walk into a field office is going to be much greater. Your wait time to schedule an appointment is going to be much further off in the future.
Maybe DOGE is not doing it in the right way to, might be bruising some people, but, government needs to be shrunk and made more efficient, and why not take somebody extremely successful from the business world to come in there and make it run efficiently?
Just because they're from the business world doesn't mean that they can lead a troubled agency. I wouldn't want our government run like Bear Stearns.
One of the infamous culprits that led to the 2008 financial crisis, a contrast to the public servants, O'Malley says, who handle Social Security claims.
People in field offices who will hold the hands of widows who are grieving, who will be patient with the grandmother who's bringing in a child with a developmental disability. It's not like pulling up to McDonald's window.
A 2024 Inspector General's report found less than 1% of payments were improper. 2/3 of that money was recovered. Still, Trump and Musk keep pushing unfounded claims of fraud, which makes O'Malley and the senators skeptical of his potential successor today believe the goal isn't efficiency, but sabotage.
All of this is about turning the public against the agency, and they do that by wrecking its ability to provide customer service in a timely way, and then that way they will feel justified in enough of the people's eyes to rob it and to take the dollars for some other purpose.
The first veterans hospitals were established after the Civil War, and since then, the Department of Veterans Affairs has become a lifeline for retired service members and their families. But CBS's Karen Hua goes in depth on how massive VA worker cuts are threatening veterans' care.
Basic training, United States Army, I turned 21.
The Army is written all over Wendy Smith's home. Even her dog's name is Sergeant.
Come on, Sarge.
Smith was a mechanic in the Gulf War. During her service, she says she was sexually assaulted. The aftermath included drugs and alcohol. She was forced out of the Army and spent several months in prison for possession of cocaine.
I just lost everything.
So she turned to the Houston VA to get sober. Now she works there.
Mondays and Fridays are our busiest days. Man, every day feels like Monday and Friday combined.
Earlier this month, the Department of Veteran Affairs announced it will cut roughly 72,000 workers, about 15%. Smith's seen colleagues let go, and appointment wait times can be up to 4 months now.
The hope is there, and then the staff is not anymore.
Nationwide, more than 9 million veterans get physical or mental health care from the VA. More live in Texas than any other state. The nonprofit Grace After Fire handles overflow from the VA, specifically connecting women to alternative resources.
If it weren't for Grace After Fire, what would your life look like right now?
I probably wouldn't be here. I probably would have committed suicide or OD'd.
Tana Plesher is president of Grace After Fire. She began her service in the Navy at 19.
This is my boot camp picture.
As a medical specialist, Plesher responded to 9/11 and was deployed to Iraq.
A terrible thing to see humanity fall the way that it did. Well, this is daily.
Decades later, Plesher still takes medication for PTSD and depression. With the VA cuts, she worries about mental health care for other vets.
What is your fear here if male or female veterans aren't getting appointments fast enough?
That veteran suicide rate is going to go up.
Grace After Fire gets most of its money from the state of Texas. That funding has not been cut, but Plesher says some state partnerships have already pulled back because it's considered a DEI organization for working exclusively with women.
We don't want to be labeled. We served, and we served proudly.
A battle for funding and staffing. Plesher and Smith know they'll be fighting. Karen Hua, CBS News, Houston.
President Trump insists he is not touching Social Security, but he is touching Social Security jobs.
7,000 of the 57,000 jobs, or about 12%, are being eliminated. And Lana Zach tells us that has many of the more than 73 million recipients worried.
At the weekly senior lunch social in North Liberty, Iowa, chicken was on the menu, but Social Security was top of mind.
It's scary. What do we want the politicians in D.C. to know? This is our life.
Are you afraid of what might happen?
It's stressing, wondering what's going to happen.
Iowa, like the rest of America, is aging. 1 in 4 people here is 60 or older, so uncertainty in Washington means anxiety here.
Do you actually have nightmares about this?
I would say daymares.
Every day you're worried?
Every day I'm worried that somehow he'll lose his care.
Ann Bacon relies on the $1,600 a month from Social Security that pays for her brother Rick Clark's 24-hour care. He has dementia.
What is your name? The very first time I called, I was on the call for 3 hours on hold when the call dropped.
You were on hold for 3 hours and then the call dropped?
Yeah.
When the check didn't arrive in January, Bacon ended up on hold for 6 hours on 2 separate calls. Then the problem was resolved in minutes. We tried calling this afternoon.
The estimated hold time is greater than 120 minutes.
Wait times have long plagued the agency, and the average wait times have doubled in the last 6 months.
No one plans to become disabled, but the reality is that people do.
John Hale worked for Social Security for 25 years. He and his wife Terry are now advocates for older and disabled Iowans.
It's about retirement benefits, it's about survivors' benefits, and about payments to people with disabilities.
One of the things that concerns us, and I think concerns those people, is there's a bunch of billionaires who are making decisions about this service who will never need Social Security. They'll never have a family member who needs Social Security. they are out of touch with the real world.
And Lana Zak joins us now from Iowa City, Iowa. Lana, even before the Trump administration, Social Security was at a 50-year staffing low. And over the last 10 years, 13 million new Americans joined the system because they're baby boomers. So it was already under strain. What are the strains that folks you're talking to are talking about?
Well, they are concerned about any interruption to their benefits with those thousands of announced staff cuts, confusion about regional office closures, and now a new requirement that will take place in 2 weeks, forcing many of them to go in person to those offices to try and prove their identity and their citizenship. Their budgets are so tight. One woman told me that any interruption to that monthly check would mean that she wouldn't have the $5 to pay for that senior lunch.
And the general in charge of the National Security Agency and U.S. Cyber Command is the latest to be fired in a purge of national security officials. Margaret Brennan has the details.
President Trump's firing of the top two leaders of the powerful National Security Agency, Cyber Command General Timothy Hawk and Deputy Wendy Noble, and the dismissal of at least 6 White House National Security Council aides followed an extraordinary Oval Office meeting Wednesday between President Trump and far-right activist Laura Loomer. CBS News has learned that Loomer, who has entertained 9/11 conspiracy theories, has a history of anti-Muslim, anti-immigrant social media posts, privately and publicly accused the officials of subverting Trump's agenda and being disloyal. President Trump said he did discuss personnel with Loomer.
Laura Loomer is a very good patriot. She makes recommendations of things and people, and sometimes I listen to those recommendations like I do with everybody. I listen to everybody.
Chris Krebs, a CBS News consultant, was a top cybersecurity official during the first Trump administration.
So Laura Loomer, this far-right activist, said Hawk was fired because he was, quote, disloyal to President Trump. What do you make of that?
He's exactly the kind of leader I think we need in that role. It is surprising, and I think it is a bit of a setback for us as we see China, as we see Russia and Iran getting more and more aggressive in cyberspace to move out one of our most accomplished, distinguished cyber warriors.
This went right to the Oval Office, the conversation about these National Security Council officials.
There's a short circuit happening here in the traditional process. There's a different kind of influence that is informing personnel processes and decisions. And I think that's in part what's just so unusual about the moment, where we have really, really capable people in leadership positions that I think are serving the Constitution well, but unfortunately their time's up in their jobs.
And Margaret Brennan joins us now from Washington. Margaret, if you could take us through the scope of what the NSA does and why this is such a big deal today.
Well, Maurice, the NSA is arguably the most powerful intelligence collection agency this country has because they vacuum up information through signals intelligence intercepts, through cyber collection, through wiretaps, and they do that overseas. They then work hand in glove with the military's cyber command. Now, General Hawk is a 4-star general. He was unanimously confirmed by Congress to that job. And he swore an oath of allegiance to the U.S. Constitution, no matter who is president. His accuser, Laura Loomer, says his fault is working for the last president.
Margaret, and you're hearing there might be more changes in store, perhaps, for this important agency?
Yes, John, we are. Actually, CBS has learned that President Trump is considering splitting off the NSA from the military. Other presidents have also considered this and then ruled it out. Doing so, splitting it off, would allow for President Trump to put a political ally at the helm. General Hawk opposed it.
You may remember one of the 4 U.S. Army soldiers killed last month during a training exercise in Lithuania was from Guam. Dante Taitano was his name.
About 14% of the population of Guam are veterans. For them, Adam Yamaguchi reports, getting the health care they need can be a challenge.
Every week in the U.S. territory of Guam, these military veterans come together and pass around this paddle so each can speak.
I come back to this place to reflect on the service that I've done.
This is the only place that they sort of break down a little.
This is their therapy for physical and psychological wounds sustained in combat in Iraq and Afghanistan.
A few nights ago, I was thinking of suicide.
I wanted to end my life because I'm worth more to my family dead than I am alive.
Not true, bro. We got you, bro. Thank you, bro.
For people in Guam, military service is an economic opportunity. Of the roughly 170,000 residents who live here, 24,000 of them are military veterans. Despite that, there's only one small VA clinic on the island, with one psychologist.
We're 3 hours away from VA Philippines. We need to go that way. A lot better treatment. Imagine I walked through the door and I got an appointment. Hawaii, you gotta wait for months.
Due to the lack of services here, Roy Gamboa assembled this group. He served 10 years in the Marine Corps, and he calls this group Got Your 671. 671 is the area code for Guam.
In the first couple of years, everything was coming out of our pockets. Since then, we've applied for and received a couple of grants to help keep our doors open.
But the vets we met are worried about the looming budget cuts to the VA. The agency has terminated 585 contracts as part of an ongoing audit. Gamboa worries his group could be next.
I have PTSD, I have chronic depression.
Donovan Santos is also a combat veteran. He's now the person on the listening end of the group's suicide prevention hotline.
I pretty much help those that fall through the cracks, that feel like they're alone.
You talk them off the ledge?
Yes, I'm there with them on the ledge. I'm there with them to pull them back, to catch them.
Where would you be without this?
Honest, I'd be dead. Sometimes I wish my brothers were here, and I wasn't.
But you're carrying on their fight.
Yep.
You're not alone, man. Not alone. Roy Gamboa told us it's a fight they all hope to carry on long into the future.
You've probably saved lives. You've probably kept people from making that final decision.
You know, and I'll keep going. I mean, we were willing to die for each other in combat. I refuse to believe that it was all for nothing.
Now, in light of recent cuts to the VA's budget, Roy and other veterans were recently in San Francisco to plead their case for continued funding. Now, these American citizens on the U.S. territory of Guam can't vote for president, and they don't have a vote in Congress, so there's really nobody in power to advocate on their behalf.
Revealing report. Adam Yamaguchi, thank you so much, and we cannot thank them enough for their service.
That's right.
This week, in his first network television interview since becoming Health and Human Services Secretary, Robert F. Kennedy sat down with CBS's Dr. John LaPook. Kennedy said he was not familiar with cuts to programs that could have a devastating impact on infectious diseases and mental health. Well, tonight, Dr. LaPook reports how some of those controversial cuts could impact you.
Every human has health needs. The need for public health doesn't disappear just because there isn't funding for it.
Dr. Megan Ranney is Dean of Yale University's School of Public Health, a global leader in medical research. The federal cuts have eliminated at least a dozen scientific grants at the school, covering mental health, genetics, and infectious disease.
The announcement of almost $12 billion of cuts to state and local health departments, that's directly affecting our ability to track bird flu, measles outbreaks.
Dr. Ranney spent decades as an emergency room physician. She says while funding priorities change with every new administration, these latest cuts have left her puzzled.
Has anybody given you any rationale that makes sense to you for cutting these specific grants?
You know, we get letters saying that the grants no longer go along with the priorities of the federal government.
So nothing more specific than that?
Mm-mm.
Now scientists aren't sure what the NIH may consider problematic. For example, cancer and infectious disease research involving messenger RNA, technology that became politicized when used to make COVID vaccines.
There seems to be some magical list of forbidden words, and people are trying to guess what those are because they don't want their grant to get flagged.
What's the long-term repercussion of not doing basic science now?
We're not going to feel those effects for a while, but they're going to be real. And we're going to watch that innovation and ingenuity go elsewhere.
Brain drain.
Yeah.
CBS News has counted more than 36 Health and Human Services offices and programs that are either being downsized or eliminated. They include mental health, environmental health and asthma, and injury prevention.
I would be the first to say that we need to improve efficiency at government. However, this is not that.
Connecticut Public Health Commissioner Dr. Manisha Jutani says the cuts are more than an academic problem and will compromise services such as vaccine education and in-home support for parents of newborns.
How soon will losing these funds actually affect the life of a person?
I'd say today. To do this in a way where you don't think about the investments you've already made, millions of dollars of investments that are now going to be lost, is short-sighted. Let us finish this work.
But for now, whether the work will go forward is very much in question. Dr. John LaPook, CBS News, New York.